Right, my friends, today we're talking about something that, frankly, I cannot believe I've not made a video about yet. It's about damn time. How the Flood will/could play into Halo 7's story. And I want to start off by talking about the actual likelihood of the Flood being in Halo 7. And not to go crazy, but I'm going to start off with a little well-aged yet reserved dose of hopium.
That's insane.
Just a little bit, nothing too crazy, don't worry, we're not overdosing on hopium, just a little tiny bit of hopium to start us off, right? So, if we look at the release cadence of the next Halo games, at least the theoretical release cadence, right? It's sounding like the next Halo game is not Halo 7, or even Tatanka, it's actually gonna be the Halo 1 remake.
Slow down, you're losing me.
So, my theory right now is that the Halo 1 remake is essentially being used as a means for 343 to learn how to develop in Unreal Engine, which will then be used in Halo 7 and presumably Tatanka, if that thing even exists still as well. I assume that will be in Unreal Engine as well. But the Halo 1 remake is primarily a means for them to learn how to make Halo in this new Unreal Engine, right? And what does Halo 1 have? Halo 1 has the Flood, and of course, we'd at least kind of hope that that means that the remake will also have the Flood. I mean, I think it's fair to say that if the Halo 1 remake didn't have the Flood, well, World War III would probably break out. Now, my hope is that with the remake not exactly being a spin-off like a Halo Wars game, for example, but rather a mainline game, just a different kind of mainline game, that game having the Flood and being the first mainline game in, God, how long? 17 years now to have the Flood, it kind of opens 343 up to the idea of reintroducing them again into the main story. If the Halo 1 remake does the Flood justice, and pushing the boat out a little bit further, if it takes it beyond just doing it justice and absolutely nails the Flood beyond our wildest dreams, then I guarantee the response to just that section of the remake alone will be some of the loudest positive reaction to anything that 343 have ever done. And if we get that, if that happens, again, big if, hopium, hypothetical, but big if that happens, then that will end up being some absolutely fantastic ammo to give them a reason to reintroduce the Flood to the mainline story. The Halo 1 remake nailing the Flood, and then the reaction to that being the most deafening kind of positive feedback, is like the most perfect feedback the higher-ups could ever need to kind of ease up to the idea of adding the Flood back, because clearly for the last decade they've not been interested in doing the Flood for whatever reason, whether that's T14 or just, I don't know, general story direction. Personally, I think it's more the T14 thing, but either way, they've not been open to the idea of it. But if this remake nails the Flood and the feedback is overwhelmingly positive, I could definitely see them easing up to the idea of bringing them back to the mainline story where they belong. There's also the significantly more far-flung hope that the reason 343 are doing a Halo 1 remake, likely before Halo 7, is, at least in part, so they can learn how to develop the Flood for a first-person shooter game. Because, bear in mind, 343 have never had Flood in any of their FPS games. Spartan Assault or Strike had them, and Halo Wars 2 had them, and that's it. They've never had them in a first-person shooter game. So going back and remaking Halo 1 from the ground up with all the Flood sections and nailing the vibe of them would be a great way for them to learn how to make the Flood for Halo 7 and how to integrate them into Halo's world and story. But like I said, that is a significantly more far-flung hope. Please do not put any hopium into that. Don't go huffing that hopium. Just have it as a slightly positive thought at the back of your mind that if it's true, amazing, great, fantastic, we're back. If it's not true, you didn't put enough hopium in it to actually have enough of a stake in it. Regardless though, with the Halo 1 remake on the horizon, it's kind of a given that the Flood are also on our horizons as well, in some capacity at least. Okay, now I want to talk more so about how the Flood might return in Halo 7, and for this section and also for the rest of the video, I'm kind of running with the assumption that Halo 7's story is still going to be set on Zeta Halo, for many reasons. We'll touch more on why later, but I think most people expect and also really want it to be. So, if you ask me, I think an outbreak on Zeta Halo, genuinely, hand on heart, is kind of inevitable. There is no way that the ring sustains as much damage as it did in Halo Infinite, and also suffers such widespread power failures in all of its subsystems as it did in Infinite, and not one Flood containment breach happens as a consequence. I mean, hell, you can literally see a whole chunk of the ring is missing. There is no way that that happens and not one flood containment facility gets compromised. Touching more on the subsystems losing power as well, Point of Light made a very strong point of noting that, again, there are loads of facilities under the surface of the ring in the maintenance hallways and stuff that are completely lacking power. Where are flood research facilities typically held? Yep, underground. That's right, under the surface of the Halo ring. There is no way that there isn't at least one of them on the ring that has suffered a power failure. I genuinely, hand on heart, believe that in the background of Halo Infinite's campaign, elsewhere on the ring, there's an outbreak beginning that we are going to have to deal with. And one of the cool things to note as well is that if/when the Flood do eventually pop up on Zeta Halo, it likely is going to cause a 4-way war. We're going to have the UNSC fighting the Banished, fighting the Sentinels, and also fighting the Flood, which would be very, very cool. We've not really had that for a while. Another way they could come back is via silencers. So Halo Infinite had a very weirdly strong emphasis on silencers and how they played into the story. Of course, one of the first things we see on Zeta Halo is the big Silex room with all of them rotating round, and then also the Silex repository with the grunts and the jackals and the brutes and the elites and all the other species in the silexes stored, and then of course the Harbinger is freed by being freed from her Silex. There's also the Flood Silex in Foundation as well, again in the subsystem that elsewhere on the ring has lost power. Hell, there are even sections of Foundation that have lost power. So is it really that crazy to assume that either where we were on the ring or elsewhere, there's a repository of Flood Silexes that has suffered damage, and as a result, the Flood have been freed from their Silexes? I don't think that's too crazy to assume. Now, this is a much bigger long shot, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyway because this story was told within the kind of remit of Halo Infinite's lifespan, and that's the Condor that's full of combat forms that escapes from Site-22 from the story Saturn devouring his son. Now, if you don't remember, this was the story that released last October for, was it Season 5, I think, that had all the Flood, paid armor. It was basically a story about an outbreak that occurred in 2556 on a asteroid during a mining operation by a bunch of corporations. They basically mined into an asteroid, and then they found a foreigner ship buried in the asteroid that when they opened it, a load of combat forms run out, right? So that outbreak was not fully contained because a bunch of the combat forms from the site managed to capture a Condor and escape the asteroid before the Max Strike came down to destroy the infected Spartan. Now, like I said, that took place in 2556, which is 4 years prior to Halo Infinite, and as far as we're aware, in the lore, no outbreak has popped up in the galaxy as a result of that Condor, at least yet. Now, granted, that's because that story was only written a few months ago, and there's not really been much expansion of the wider lore since then, so maybe that outbreak has already popped up on some colony world somewhere and has already been contained. We just haven't read the story in which that happens yet. But there is the small chance that that Condor, by some crazy, grace of luck, makes it to Zeta Halo and crashes and the combat forms come out and that's how the outbreak starts. Personally, I don't see that happening at all. I have a feeling that that Condor with combat forms in is going to get tied up in a story or a book or something. I don't think that'll ever play into the games, but, for the sake of being a completionist, I wanted to mention it anyway. And then as well, there's always the chance that we get kind of a repeat of Halo 1 somewhere down the line in Halo 7's story, where, in the place of the Covenant, the Banished are extremely foolhardy and, in their foolishness, release the Flood accidentally. Just like how the Covenant did it in Halo 1, where they went to access a foreigner repository and actually released the Flood, maybe the Banished do something similar on Zeta Halo, although that kind of, in a way, has already happened. I mean, the outbreak on the Ark in Awakening the Nightmare was literally caused because Voridus did what the Covenant did in Halo 1. He broke into an area that, well, he kind of in a way did it, right? Atriox very clearly told him not to go into High Charity because there's Flood in there, and Voridus completely ignores him, goes into High Charity to steal the prizes within, and of course releases the Flood, and the rest is history. Also, with how much 343 were trying to parallel Halo 1 with Halo Infinite's story, maybe somewhere down the line in the Zeta Halo story, they'll try and replicate 343 Guilty Spark, but with the Banished. But personally, I'm not too sold on that. I think hands down the most likely way that the Flood will emerge on Zeta Halo is through a containment failure or a power failure in a containment facility. It makes so much sense, man. It makes so much sense. And honestly, I can't believe that wasn't in Infinite's story at all. Maybe in DLC it would have been. Initiation 00 made a really interesting series of videos recently where he kind of like pseudo planned out Infinite's supposed campaign DLC, where each DLC was based on a level from Halo 1, and I think if there had been a DLC that had like planned out like that, then that's kind of how the Flood Outbreak would have begun. So, kind of similar to Halo 1's Outbreak, but also merged with the idea of the subsystems losing power. That was a complete tangent that I didn't need to go on, but you know I like talking about the Flood, so it had to be done. Either way, though, I think the most likely chance is a containment breach in a facility. It's just got to happen. How has it not happened yet?
So, if you want to experience Halo's existing Flood containment breaches in gorgeous quality and frame rates, look no further than my Flood-themed line of PCs, made in partnership with Apex Gaming PCs. From the Pure Form to the Gravemind and the mega powerful Primordial build, we've got PC builds of all varying power and price range. Just head on over to the link in the description to pick one of these floody bad boys up today.
But the most important thing about the Flood returning in Halo 7 is how they're going to play into the overall story, because if they just come back for no reason, well, why bother? You want them to play into the story and have a significant role in moving the story forward, right? And I think the biggest reason for them coming back is to do with the Endless being precursor supremacists, as I spoke about a few videos ago, that essentially want to restore the precursors to the top of the galactic food chain. And to do that, they're going to need to use any kind of precursor tech or entities that exist out there still. And as far as we're aware, besides the domain, the only other precursor entity still in existence are the Flood. You know, we've spent all this time pondering whether the Endless might be immune to the Flood because of biological or neurological or immuno reasons, right? What if the reason isn't anything like that, but rather just because the Endless and the Flood are allies of the same species? Both are descendants of the precursors, and the intents of both species are to gain complete control of the galaxy, albeit through very, very different means, at least we assume, so it stands to reason that the Endless and the Flood would unify to restore their status. And also, if you buy into the theory that the Halo universe is stuck in an infinite loop, then the Flood allying with the Endless just makes even more sense. Now, if you haven't seen my theory video talking about this infinite loop thing, well, I'm not surprised, because the video is like 8 years old and it's probably very due a remake, which I might do soon, but if you haven't seen it, this is kind of the gist of that theory. The precursors come to a galaxy, like they did with our Milky Way, and seed that galaxy with species. They then let those species evolve, and then eventually they test them with the Flood to see if they're adequate inheritors of their mantle of responsibility. If the species beat the Flood, which in Silentium was called the Precursor's final test, then the species that beat them inherit the Precursor's mantle of galaxy guardianship. If the species fail, then they're assimilated into sweet unity by the Flood, who then recede from the galaxy due to a lack of food, and the Precursors move to another galaxy to repeat until they find their worthy inheritors. Now, the Endless being immune to the Halos means that a species can't just rely on the Halo rings anymore to beat the Precursor's final test. They have to truly prove themselves as worthy inheritors without using what is essentially the galactic get out of Flood apocalypse for free card. Also, the idea of the Precursors locking the galaxy in an infinite loop, and then one of their likely descendant species being called the Endless? I mean, come on, it lines up perfectly. Also, because of the, well, not so subtle hints at the Endless being the true Reclaimers, you could even say that their emergence in Infinite marks the official beginning of the Precursor's final test, which should usher in the Flood once again. Of course, this is all entirely theoretical, as is any discussion about any facet of Halo 7 right now, but you can't say that it doesn't line up a little bit too well. Now, there are other reasons outside of canon reasons for the Flood to return as well. One of the main ones being that the Halo story has so much unfinished business with Zeta Halo, it's actually kind of alarming. So I think everyone is kind of on the same page with this now, but it's safe to say that Halo Infinite did not do Zeta Halo justice whatsoever. Not to massively simplify its history or anything, right? But Zeta Halo is literally the Flood ring. It is the Flood ring, and Infinite had zero Flood. I would also even go as far as saying that maybe, aside from the Primordial, there is not one single entity in the entirety of Halo lore that has more connections to the Flood than Zeta Halo. And you know who also has a ton of connections to Zeta Halo? The Primordial, the only other thing in Halo's lore that has more connections to the Flood than Zeta Halo. You get the message. There are tons of fan-favourite and massively important locations and landmarks on Zeta Halo as well that, again, weren't even so much as offhand mentioned in Halo Infinite. I mean, all the Flood research facilities that make up the Palace of Pain, the Tudesa prehistoric human camps that are on the ring, Mendicant Bias's core extension, the Primordials time acceleration capsule, and so many more that I'm probably forgetting. Needless to say, Zeta Halo was not done justice in Halo Infinite, and the best way to do it justice is something Flood related. Halo 7, you have to do this. You literally have to do this. And another non-canon reason for the Flood possibly returning in Halo 7 is, like I said earlier, if they're done right and done really well, in fact, in the Halo 1 remake, then our feedback is very loud and it encourages the higher-ups to be like, yeah, okay, maybe people actually want the Flood, as if they shouldn't have already realized that by now, right? I mean, not to harp on this one too much, right? But if 343 or whoever's making that remake do nail the Flood in it, we have to be like overwhelmingly, deafeningly loud with our praise, because if we are like that, if we use that as evidence that we want the Flood back and that there's a large group of people out there that want the Flood in Halo, I see no reason why the higher-ups wouldn't finally, after all these years, cave and add them back to the main games. Of course, if they end up fumbling the Flood in the remake, then, well, overwhelmingly positive reception is going to be overwhelmingly negative, as it should be, but hopefully that's a bridge that we never have to cross. But I can genuinely see such a positive reaction to them being done right, being the reason they eventually come back in the main story, because if people see that and they're like, yeah, I want more of this, then of course they're going to play into that. Who knows though? I just wanted to make a video really badly talking about Halo 7 and the Flood, because I realized it's a few months ago now when I was talking about the Endless in Halo 7 that I'd actually never made a dedicated Halo 7 Flood video, and given that it's like, you know, me, I thought it was about time that I actually do that video. So leave your thoughts down below in the comments on how you think the Flood will come back in Halo 7, if you think they'll come back, how you think they'll be done, whether you think they should come back. Let me hear it down below in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And so with that said, let's round this video out here because my sinuses are currently being assaulted en masse by Flood spores. You know, these things, Flood spores, which are in the air loads at the moment. It's not great, let me tell you. I know how the Arbiter felt all the way throughout Halo 3 Cortana. I know how he felt. So, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support as per usual, and thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you all in the next video.